He's not a lobbyist for anybody except for the safety, security, and health of the constituents of this country. Next week, Curtis will be appearing before the Texas Public Utilities Commission on the same topic. I give you now Curtis Bennett.
Thank you. I have to wait for my helper here. You guys know, just to start this out, and this is just so important to you guys, are there any electricians in the room, science professionals in the room, technical people in the room? And it really doesn't matter if you are or you aren't. Here's the most important part. As electrical professionals, we just do a job for people. We do a job. We are the BC government's energy officials. We are the government's technical support. We give them the information they need to do their jobs properly, and here's why I'm here today. When we go to that authority and I say to the minister, you've got a problem with what you're doing with these meters, and he sends me back a form letter, we would never accept that garbage anywhere in the world because it's going to kill people. When we step in front of these government officials, as the science behind them, we're not lobbying for anybody. We work for the government. We work for insurers, and we represent you. We do it safely. We do all the above. And one of the reasons that I'm here today is, guess what? Our government is not doing our job properly, and I say that without malice. I look forward to these guys stepping up and trying to represent this nonsense. When these guys are reporting that you're going to see information here, and I'm going to show you guys some information that's never been seen before in the world. Now, you imagine this for me. Listen, I got my hair cut today. I got ready for this, but imagine this for me as listen, I'm an electrician, I'm a farmer, I drove truck, I've done all these things, whatever it is. I'm just up here doing my job, but imagine this for me. We consulted on national security issues after 9/11 with the work that we do. Can imagine this. I lecture medicine where doctors get education credits they need for licensing. We don't sell anything, we're there to help them. Now, I know there's going to be lots of people in the room that say, you know, that guy thinks he's tall and he's got a lot of hair, but guess what? I'm going to show you guys some secrets of the work that we do, because everybody, even when we do electrical school, guess what? The entire world is blind to temperature. We calculate for it. Engineering, space shuttle, it doesn't matter what it is. How many people have gone to their doctor's office with an inflammation problem before? Well, guess what? Your doctor, with the greatest intent in the world, is blind. Strokes, temperature, it's all temperature related. So I'm going to show you guys some real secret information because, one, I want to kind of beat up the technical people a little bit to show them that, guess what? We're not here messing around. You can't hear me? How's that? Is that better? Can you guys do that? Absolutely. Don't forget. Tell me what to do. But here's one of the reasons why this is important too. Pardon me? Okay. How's that? Okay. This is where we all live. We might have geographically defined borders. Guess what? We share the atmosphere, we share the water, we share everything. If one country's got a problem, you know, you guys heard about this nuclear reaction in Japan. It's not isolated to the areas, it's coming back to us. Now what I want to do is I'm going to show you guys some temperature issues. I want to get past some of this stuff. You guys can ask questions afterwards. But this will just get you going, and you guys will be able to relate to lots of this because you live in buildings. You've got these health problems. So we'll just start with this. Ed, next slide. Now, we talk about buildings. Now, you can imagine this. When I'm going to show you images here, colder temperatures are going to be represented with darker colors. Hotter temperatures are going to be represented with brighter colors. So here's an example of what we do when we design buildings. We design buildings to resist the flow of heat through them. We insulate them, we put in energy systems, and at the end of it, the building is signed off as compliant because we really can't see what's going on with the building. So we just developed these applications starting 33 years ago where we show that this is missing insulation in one stud space. And this should have been caught during inspection. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but guess what? It's an energy waste, it's a mold-related issue, and you can see that it's right here. So the idea that you can send a contractor back there just to do the job better, get it done in the best representation of all people. This is all we represent with this. Next slide. Lots of guys that I graduated with on the engineering side of this said, Curtis, you know, that's a house. All buildings aren't like that. Here's a commercial building. This is in Kelowna. Do you see this dark area here? They only insulated the showroom. The heaters are on the roof. Now, have you ever tried to heat something from the roof down? It's actually so hot up here that it's conducting out through the trusses where the equipment's working harder. It does not comply with building code. So even with a commercial building, people that are spending that money, you want to make sure you get your money's worth with this. We want to put heating in a floor where heat rises, where your thermostat is 5 feet off the floor. This is actually producing more emissions. This is actually heating the outdoors because this is actually coming out through the mass of the concrete itself. Now, how many people have ever had a sunburn before? Well, here's what we're supposed to be doing with buildings. Buildings in Kelowna, buildings in BC are designed and insulated for very specific temperatures through building code. Now, what they tell us, even from an engineering perspective, is we're supposed to design, here's an example, in Kelowna. Design temperatures are -20 to simulate the coldest time of the year, +33 to simulate the hottest time of the year. The code says, watch out for that thing called solar radiation, but we just couldn't see it. And here's what's going on with that dark absorbent material. Now, construction guys, or anybody that's ever done this, you've sat on a roof before and burned your butt on the shingles, or you've leaned against material, whether it's the car or whatever. Here's what UV and solar radiation is doing to $1 billion worth of development in Kelowna. The roofs are 198.2 Fahrenheit. They're 100 degrees Fahrenheit over design temperature. And so we're not supposed to be doing this where, guess what? I'm going to show you here, you should see what shade does. The idea that, you know, in days of old we had white stucco buildings. If you've ever seen whitewashed buildings, buildings have a function. And people have to remember that because the last thing you want is your building to be exceeding these design temperatures because you're going to create a moldy environment. Now, how many people have heard of air conditioning in buildings? How many people even have air conditioning in their buildings? Do you know air conditioning is refrigeration? It is really the same thing as when you're cooking in your home. This is so ridiculous, even to me as a tradesperson, that it is so ridiculous that you might as well go in your building, open up the fridge door. You got air conditioning. Let her run. But the thing is, you're actually creating this environment in there where there's mold, health-related issues. And again, these are things that couldn't be seen before. Now, you've heard of with the work that we do, you've heard of the United Nations worried about climate change. Climate change means there's something heating the atmosphere. But because they couldn't see it, they blamed it on greenhouse gases instead of saying, guess what? We've got buildings that are close to boiling temperature. Heat rises, close to boiling temperature. You know, when you think of this, 100 degrees Celsius is boiling. Guess what? We documented buildings 94 degrees Celsius. And even with my own education, I said, oh my God, I said, we're not designing, we're not thinking about that. We're not doing that, and guess what? That heat rises atmospherically just like a hot air balloon does, and guess what? The winds take it downstream where we're changing climate. Climate is the basic interaction of cold and warm air with water vapor. That's it. If we heat the atmosphere, we change climate, and hence, guess what? Droughts, floods, severe weather. I mean, how much have you seen going on lately with these summers, these records, hailstones, hurricanes, tornadoes? Guess what we're not supposed to be doing? Because not only this, guess what? Your building's going to be illegal. It's not complying with code. It's not insurable. So keep that in mind that here's even something I did myself. And listen, I have to kick myself in the butt. I removed a couple of trees from the front of my place. Then when I started imaging buildings, I said, I can't believe I did that because underneath the shade of a tree, do you know what the temperature was? Exactly atmospheric temperature. Creation put those trees and that ground cover on the planet as a thermal regulator. How many people have heard about this Enridge, whatever the heck, oil pipeline thing going through here? Well, guess what? Here's what I'm reporting to the provinces. You're going to not only scrape the ground of everything living to put in this pipeline, you're going to create a 2-province-wide heat sink that is going to change climate. Now, you imagine this even with this. I'm going to show you guys information because when we actually consult for Department of Fisheries and Oceans, guess what? Fish are temperature sensitive. And these guys, when we did an application for them, we're just going to show you more work with this. But take this into consideration, one, when you're doing a renovation on your property, when you're buying something. And you can use this for negotiation because Putting shade on the side of buildings is just putting trees, functional landscaping. There's a big business in this. Next slide, please. Here's what I told you with this. This building is painted 2 different colors. The darker side on the outside is brown. You see the heat actually coming through the lumber? Imagine what it takes to heat the outside and that heat to transfer through the wood product inside the building. And this is the air conditioning right here. Cold air is heavier, it's laying on the floor. And the only smart, this is what's really cool with this is my place. I actually did this to poke fun at me because here are my animals. Here I'm going, oh, it's cooking in here. Here are the animals laying on the floor, and I'm thinking, I'm supposed to be the smart one. These guys are the ones laying on the floor enjoying the air conditioning. They're looking up at me like, guess what? You're not too bright as it is. But here it is. To do this here, 3,000 watts of energy produced to react to the symptoms of the exterior being radiated. And here's why this is important too. When we talk about frequency issues, this is created by frequencies, natural frequencies that they say we're surrounded by. Okay, next slide, please. Here's, look at shade of a tree on the building. What a difference. What a difference in making a building even just legal that, my goodness, creation was doing some smart work there. Next slide, please. How many people were here for the forest fires? Guess what? They fought the forest fires blind. So imagine this, even $7 million a day. Here they were fighting those forest fires blind. Here's what we've done for fire departments starting over 20 years ago, where here's Kettle Valley on August 21st. Kettle Valley smoked right in. Here's the buildings right here. People were walking around, and we tried to help the government, Premier Campbell's office, and they said, oh, you're the guy that can see through this smoke. And these guys thought that I was smoking something because they just ignored it. But guess what? Here's the 21st of August right here. People were still walking around Kettle Valley. So all I was doing with my crew is I was training them, and I was watching this fire coming closer to Kelowna. And when I saw this above the buildings, this is that forest fire coming to interface with Kelowna, and it's moving 100 meters or 300 feet a minute. And this actually, believe it or not, listen, I flagged down an RCMP officer, and I said, you got to get these people out of here now. And to show him this, and he said, it's here, and I said, it's here. And this initiated the evacuation of 15,000 people. But the idea that we're fighting these fires blind is not the way we want to go. So this is just additional work that we do in just giving these guys sight. We don't tell people how to fight fires. They're the professionals with this. Next slide. How many people have heard of groundwater? I didn't even know what it was until biologists came to us and said, listen, can you see groundwater from the air? You did that. And I said, what's the big deal? We did that years ago. And they said, that's where fish spawn. They said, can you do that again? I said, of course we can. I said, you guys couldn't do that? And they said, no. The application just exceeded their expertise. And now I know why when I go fishing, I can't catch a cold. Because here's groundwater right here. The darker stuff right here in the wintertime. Here's groundwater in here. I would have been fishing out here, where here's where the fish are. Doing those things. That's where they stay. Groundwater stays the same temperature year-round. So just to image that for biologists, hydrologists, so these guys can just do a better job. That's all we do with this. Next slide. How many people heard of those oil spills on the coast? Well, guess what? We were in contact with the Coast Guard. They said, you can't see the oil in the water. We said, we can show you the oil in the water overnight. Here's a little oil spill right here. Here's what it looks like. You could actually move the ships around this thing, watch the booms, and pick up the oil as they did this and do this in the dark of the night. This technology just allows them to see this. And the reason I want you guys to see this is there's nothing special about this, but this is a science-related work we do even to come and talk about a smart meter issue. Next slide. How many people have heard of SARS, N1H1, flus at the airports, and everything else? The same people that sell us equipment tried to image people at ports of entry. They imaged hundreds of millions of people at ports of entry and couldn't produce one image of a flu because the application exceeded their expertise. They didn't know what they were looking at. So this is a good case where I actually had to meet with Health Canada, and they were so mad at the infrared industry because they said, we brought people off an airplane with flus, and these guys couldn't see it. And I said, the application exceeded their expertise. Just because you work for Boeing doesn't mean you know how to fly a plane. But you can see this. You're expecting relative symmetry between sides of the body. She's got an inflamed sinus on the one side. Next slide, please. Here's inflammation. When you go to the doctor's office, inflammation, simply put, is elevated temperature. Now, this woman was being denied a compensation claim when she said, I've got a wrist problem. And so for us to just be able to isolate that wrist problem for her. And here's where this is good too. Listen, we don't do this, we don't do any work to be nice. Because even in consulting in doctor's office, they said, we're going to test you on this. I said, bring it on. We're ready for this because we can also catch insurance fraud. We don't do this to sell anything. It's to give these guys sight of their objectives so they can better represent you. When they can see inflammation, they can fix it. As electrical professionals, when we have a problem and see it, we fix it. We don't treat symptoms, we don't react to it, or there's going to be problems. Next slide. Anybody heard of diabetic neuropathy? Here's this guy's foot right here. It's inflamed right here, and this little dark spot here, that's the center of his dying. He's actually dying. This guy's going to work towards things where they're going to start chopping parts of his feet off. So the idea that they can do this just to see their objectives, this is what it's all about. And we actually did some amazing work to actually, guess what, create and improve circulation in their feet to change that for them and save them from that. Next slide. Here's this where a senior citizen goes to her doctor and she said, and doc, I've got these problems with my legs, they're hurting me. Her doctor was referring her to a psychiatrist. When guess what, here's leg inflammation. Here's those veins causing problems. They just couldn't see it. So the idea, again, to give them sight of their objective. Next slide. Eye problems. Here's somebody with glaucoma. The idea that you can actually see this with a non-invasive technology. So these guys can do this without hurting you. Next slide. Anybody heard of rheumatoid arthritis? Look at this inflammation wrapped around his knees. And the idea that we don't care what you treat them with. We're going to be able to see physiological changes to make sure the job was done. That's it. Next slide. Here's a stroke. Now, one of the reasons this is important, too, with this part of it is this young lady was put in a hospital for 30 days. Finally, after the 30 days, they did an MRI, and they said, listen, you got 2 blockages. And they said, then, we want you to go and take a look at her. You think you can see this? And I said, absolutely. And you can see here's this cold things, this cold blockages on the side of her head with a non-invasive technology. How many people have had an x-ray before? How many people know what a CAT scan is? Do you know that a CAT scan is 700 x-rays? The equivalent of 700 x-rays so they can just get you at every angle while they're looking for something with this. And the idea that these x-rays are so invasive, you really want to avoid that stuff. But we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Here's non-cancerous breast tumors. Okay, next slide. Now here's an example of this where a 50-clinic group that does thermography imaged a young lady. Her mother had died of breast cancer. Her sister had a breast removed. She had breast imaging done, and she said, they did my imaging and said that I look relatively symmetrical. Even when I saw this image here, I said, I disagree with everything they've said. Send the imaging back. Next slide. Here's the tweaked image over here, and you can see on her left breast above her areola. Here's a hot spot right here. That's where they removed a cancerous mass. So the idea that they can pinpoint this, early detection of breast cancers. Next. This is progression of infection from a spider bite. This is over the same span of temperature. Now you can see how much the infection spread in one day. And this is a bad spider bite because these guys, I guess, your hand rots off after time. And this is how good we are as electricians and scientists in doing those things. This is my hand. And these guys said, you're still trying to image this. And I said, when am I going to get a chance to get an image of this kind of stuff? So next slide. Here's again, we talked about diabetic neuropathy. We talked about inflammation. Here's something we did. They said, can you see the inflammation in her ankle? Yes, you can see the inflammation in her ankle right here. You can also see cold toes. Her feet are not symmetrical. So we used a non-invasive product to see any physiological changes. Here's the differences after 4 hours. So the idea to give medicine the ability to see this means these wonderful professionals can just fix it better. And who would have thought, when we lecture this everywhere, they said, Curtis, where are you from? And I said, Kelowna. Kelowna, British Columbia. And they said, where's that? And I said, the beautiful Okanagan. And the idea that this is coming out of this territory. Now, how many people, Patrick Swayze, how many girls watched Patrick Swayze do the dance and do his thing? Patrick Swayze died from pancreatic cancer. Michael Landon died from pancreatic cancer. Who's the last one? Sally Rides, the astronaut, just died from pancreatic cancer. So here's the thing with this. It's so difficult to diagnose. And here's an example of what we do. And again, this is where the electrical part of my education helps so much. I was asked to look at a young man with a shoulder issue. He just had surgery. As soon as we looked at his shoulder, I said, you know, your shoulder's a little bit out. I said, what's going on with your abdomen, dude? I said, you got something going on here. And his mother's looking panicked, and he's looking at me, and I said, what's going on? I said to the doctor, I said, what the heck is there? And he said, the only thing that's there in that inverted shape is the pancreas. He said, how the heck can you see that far into the body? And I said, it's inflamed and transferring the signature to the surface. So we actually didn't even realize that they were having trouble with this diagnosis. But again, the idea that they can see this with a non-invasive technology, this is just the importance, again, of the work we do, because when I talk about smart meters and talk about these frequencies, I'm going to talk about how your lives are threatened by this. And I mean this with all the integrity in the world. And you can imagine this, when we used to go, even when you see pancreatic cancer, guess what? I had guys that I actually fired that said to me, they said, you can see cancer. And I said, yes. And they said, that guy's dying from cancer. How much do you think he'd paid for it? And that just makes me angry to think that somebody would exploit an issue like that. So not only do we beat him up a little bit, then we fire his butt. See, I didn't swear, ladies, the teachers back there. Now here when we talk about wireless technology, you know what wireless technology is doing? It's replacing wires. That's essentially what you're doing with this. So when they talk about, hey, we're going to smother, now imagine this in a classroom. They have 30 kids in there, 30 of your children in there with Wi-Fi. And because they don't want to spend the money to pull a wire to those computer stations where the economy should be, they said, hey, let's take these Wi-Fi routers and just smother that whole room with this frequency, and everybody can hook up to the internet. Well, guess what? The kids are in the circuit, except they're not insulated for it. So here the birds have got this. This wireless technology is kind of weird, eh? Okay, next slide. Here's the code. Here's the meat and potatoes behind all of this, because, and here's the important part, and especially for electrical professionals, limits of human exposure to radio frequency, electromagnetic energy, and the frequency range of. That's Health Canada's Safety Code 6. The BC government has to comply with Safety Code 6. The BC Utilities Commission has to comply with Safety Code 6. Everybody has to comply with Safety Code 6, because the meat and potatoes behind this code is this. The predominant health effect to be avoided is the unintentional stimulation of tissue. That's it. We don't want to stimulate tissue. When they talk about unintentional, because when you go to a doctor's office, they're going to x-ray you. That's the intentional stimulation of tissue. When you go to a doctor's office, how many people put on those aprons? Everybody. If you didn't do it, they wouldn't x-ray you. There's not a guy in the world that says this, Doc, just give it to me. Just radiate the crap out of me. Aim for my groin, man. I just want you to bring it on, because guess what? They'd be liable, and not only that, they'd kill you. So imagine with this. Now here's the worst part about this. When I was called by medical education, they put this on my desk and they said, people are complaining about wireless technologies. And they said, Curtis, have you heard of Wi-Fi? And I said, what the heck is that? And they said, they're radiating areas to hook up to the internet. And I said, you can't do that. I said, there are reasons we put things in wires. You can't just randomly blast frequencies out there for no particular reason in the world, because you're going to hurt people. Now, it was only a crossover into medical education for me. Now, imagine this for me as an electrician. A doctor comes to me and he said, Curtis, do you know that children and people and everybody has frequencies, voltages, capacitance, inductance, all the above? And I said, get the heck out of here. And they said, what does that mean to you? And I said, it means the body is trying to maintain an intricate electrical system. And they said, you didn't know that? And I said, if we can't use them for a conductor, we don't talk about it. You know, we use copper wires, we use aluminum, we use whatever we have to use, we don't use people. Now here's the worst part about the, go back once. Here's the worst part about this code. This code actually says this, and this is why people have to look out and listen to me on this. This code says, we don't understand, even though this code is the same as the FCC and based on 30 years of scientific literature, we don't understand the mechanisms linking the frequencies to adverse health effects. We don't know them. So because we don't know them, We're just going to carry forward and just radiate people a little bit, but as soon as we find out what those are, we will change the code if deemed necessary. So as soon as I looked at the code, I looked at it and I said, oh my God. I said, so when it comes to cell phone radiation, they said, Curtis, here's the phone, here's the antenna, here's where the biggest power density is. We go into the side of the head like this. That's the radiation device. And I said, what did you do with the towers? I said, the towers are talking to the phone. I said, it's not hitting them in the side of the head. I said, you're hitting them from head to toe. And they said, we didn't think about that. And I said, what did you do with the Wi-Fi routers in classrooms? And they said, we didn't think about that. We just thought if the kids step back from the computer a foot, they're safe. I said this, you know how many, you can imagine this, even me doing this. There's not computers in the world that can do this. And imagine what they left out of this code too. They did not include one frequency, one electrical property of a human being, because they treated them as hunks of flesh being heated in a microwave. So do you know what they based this code on? How many watts per kilogram can you take? That's it, watts per kilogram. So guess what, according to those guys, I'm a big guy, so guess what, man, I can handle 100 watts, I can handle 10 or 100 watts or whatever the heck it is. That's how ridiculous this code is. They based everything on what they call a power density. Power is watts, volts times amps. Density is something we would keep in a wire. So when you hear these guys, and you're going to hear Brian talk about measured power density outside your buildings, do you know what that means? You're in the circuit, except you're not insulated for it. How many people have hooked up that little wire to the back of your cable TV before? That little wire where it just, if you're like me and that first 2 feet makes you crazy, you know, putting that little wire in there and hooking that up. How many people have done that before? Well, you imagine this. You as a human being are that little wire, except you don't have that coaxial coating or that reflective shield to avoid that electromagnetic interference. So here's what I did with this, and here's one of the reasons why I'm here today. As soon as medicine, we looked into this and we said, oh my goodness, they missed this. So I reported this to Health Canada in my capacity. Now these guys were supposed to change the code if deemed necessary. This was reported to provinces, to premiers, to all the above. That was in September of 2010. October of 2010, the Canadian Parliament Standing Committee on Health requested that I testify and provide expert witness. And they said, Curtis, this isn't a singular opinion. I said, no, it's called electricity. We don't do this. You don't throw people into an electromagnetic field where now you've got this electromagnetic field, except you're the conductors now. So you know what Health Canada's committee did? They told these guys to investigate. Do you know what politicians did? Nothing. But here's what the meat and potatoes behind the code is. Do you know why the unintentional stimulation of tissue is to be avoided? Health Canada says this, it'll cause nerve and muscle stimulation. Nerves run every function of your body, your heart, your lungs, your breathing. In 2011, you know that sudden infant death rates were up 30% in BC over the year before. And do you know why? Here they said this, when medicine said, Curtis, could Wi-Fi do this to vulnerable babies? And you think, oh my God, could they neurologically stimulate a baby's system where here these babies would stop breathing? And the answer is yes. So that gets also inputted into the coroner's office when they're investigating this. Now next one here is, here's what a telecom worker, now you guys, how many people have been and had an x-ray? When you guys put that clothing on, when you go to the dentist and they cover you from groin to here, that's to protect you, attenuate or eliminate the frequencies from getting through to you and hurting you. Here's what a telecom worker wears. How many of your kids wear this to school? How many bees wear this? Birds wear this. Leaves wear this. Everything in the world wear this. How many of you guys are wearing this in your home to protect you guys from frequencies? Now, how many people know this? You can answer your cell phone in your basement. You can pick up Wi-Fi in your basement. You can pick up, these smart meter frequencies are coming through walls and roofs, and they're going through you. So even when I talked to Health Canada and Industry Canada on this, these guys said to me, they said, Curtis, it's not going into the skin very much. So imagine as an electrical professional, they actually say, we know we're inducing them, but just a little bit. Well, you go to an electrician and say, listen, we're going to induce this existing electrical system while it's under load and while it's functioning at a frequency. It's not happening, dude. We're going to slap the heck out of you and have you arrested after we beat you up. You go to BC Hydro, that's 60 hertz grid. Now, how many people have ever looked at appliances in your home? See, this is what they truly think about my presentation in other places too. Stop that guy. But how many people have ever looked at appliances in the back of your home where in the back of your appliances where it says 60 hertz? Do you ever see that? Because you've got 60 hertz electricity coming into your home and you need those 60 hertz appliances to be compatible. If they weren't compatible, they wouldn't run efficiently, they wouldn't run safely. It's that simple. Now, here's something unbeknownst to me with doctors. Do you know that your brain runs sometimes at 8 hertz? Half a hertz. Do you know what these smart meter frequencies are? 928 million hertz. We are not electrically compatible. We are not electrically compatible. And the idea that you can imagine here I am as an electrician, and in my capacity I'm consulting in a doctor's clinical environment and saying, you have to ask them about their wireless environment before you diagnose them. Because hitting them from head to toe is going to cause neurological stimulation and do what? And you're going to treat symptoms with this. So here's the importance of this. When these guys are just slamming these frequencies into our buildings and doing this at the rate that they shouldn't even be touching this stuff. And this is why I'm telling you this stuff. The government is not answering these questions on this. This is neurologically stimulating you. And I'm going to show you guys some stuff that's disturbing. How many people have a pacemaker? How many people know people with a pacemaker? Do you know that when you get a pacemaker put in at the hospital, do you know what the instructions from the manufacturer say? Stay out of an electromagnetic field. Do you know what the smart meters are going to do? Take the electromagnetic field to your home. And they're going to electromagnetically induce your pacemaker, and they're going to cause problems. And I actually watched an interview with a guy where he said, Curtis, that my pacemaker saved my life from the smart meters. And I said, how is that? And he said, as soon as they turned on the meters, he said, it set that thing off, so it put my heart back in arrhythmia. And I said, and then what happened? He said, well, then it shut off my pacemaker, and I had to go into intensive care. So you imagine this, listen, electromagnetic induction, it's called electricity. It's how we produce electricity. And the idea that these guys want to put a technology in there, they're not listening to their professionals on something that can kill you and take you out is disgusting, it's criminal, and our politicians just aren't doing their jobs, and that's what they're supposed to be doing. When we contact these guys on these issues, we're the professionals related to that. They're the policy advisors on this. You do not do this. When they talk about taking out pollinators, do you know what they did in Europe? They said Wi-Fi is killing trees. Well, guess what? There's nothing atomically or on the periodic table that runs at those frequencies. Has anybody ever heard of solar storms taking out satellites? Do you hear those guys whine about that? Oh, that's bad. It's going to take out some satellites. It's going to electromagnetically interfere with those satellites. So guess what us dummies as humans do? We create frequencies within the atmosphere that are taking out the human satellite, that are taking out the human grid, the bee grid. You imagine this, birds and bees and everything use a magnetic field to navigate. Imagine running into a high-speed frequency that's going a million cycles per second. And you know what it's doing? It's not just causing neurological problems, they're getting lost. It's just causing horrific things. And guess what the domino effect is? Try no food sources. We lose the pollinators, no food. Well, beached whales, everything. You start messing around with this. This isn't what creation planned for us. It's for us to develop this. And guess what it's designed for? Strictly for ease of communication. And it's not that technology is bad, but guess what we would do as electrical professionals? Wire it. Wire it. That's the real economy. Wire the schools. Wire these smart devices in a building so they can be done properly. Because I've tried sleeping in one of those outfits. You ever tried doing the mild thing in that too? It just ain't happening. Next slide, please. That's because I'm older. That's because I'm older now and no longer the wild thing. Now, when they talk about the safety of these technologies, here's what I want to show you. This is it. This is the science behind the safety of all those technologies. This is it. This is a mannequin with a hole in the head, and they fill it up with a fluid, and they've got a temperature probe in there. They mount the cell phone to this bracket right here, and they turn on the phone. Then they actually measure into the skull, and they thought, oh, this is just going into a little square area right here. They actually said, oh, look, if we radiate them with higher frequencies, they seem to heat up a little bit. Oh, my goodness, that's the basics of all things. Try sitting in a microwave for a while. It's not going to work. But the idea that this is what they do. Now, you know what they did with Wi-Fi? The kids aren't holding the computers to their head like this. So they're safe because they're sitting back from the computer. Instead of the routers are bathing the room, they're caught in the circuit. Do you know what they're doing with smart meters? They'll tell you this. The meters are safe because you're not holding a meter next to your head. If you distance yourself 8 inches from the meter, you're okay. But forget about that router that's on the pole that's designed to talk to 4,000 devices with you caught in that circuit. And it is just catastrophic hell. Now, here's something else, too. We consulted on a building, a $200 million building in Kelowna, where the engineers said, listen, we want to see the losses, energy losses, all the above. As soon as we looked at this high rise and got down to the basement, he said, they're going to put smart meters in here. And I said, those frequencies coming through the wall at those high speeds are going to cause the structure to vibrate and cause molecular earthquakes 1.8 billion times per second. It's going to go through fire separations and cause those fire separations. Now you imagine this. Imagine me trying to change direction 1.8 billion times a second, because that's what you're really doing with these frequencies. That's what you're going to do. So it's going to affect the integrity of your building. It's going to affect that part of it. So if you can't think about the health issues, think about your investment, because I said this to engineers, 1.8 billion times a second. I said, how many billion times is it okay before you guys say this building's not safe anymore? And then guess what? When they say it's not safe anymore, you're not going in your building. No financing, no nothing. So here's the dangers, but here's what they're using. This is called SAM Phantom model. Here's the little temperature. You imagine this. That's the temperature probe in the top of this little soup container. Next slide, please. Here's what I did years ago, where doctors actually said this to me. They said, Curtis, you really don't use a cell phone. I said, listen, I got enough problems without radiating my head. And they said, well, Curtis, you're okay. And I said, listen, why don't you put that phone next to your groin? I said, you know what that's doing? Imagine imagine your testicles being radiated 1.8 billion times a second. That's like 1.8 billion kicks in the testicles every second. And think about this with ovaries. Now here again, Barry Trower, genetic mutation of girls' ovaries. Genetic mutation of girls' ovaries. When they're going through walls and roofs, they're going through you. But here's a young man before cell phone use in the infrared spectrum. Here he is after an hour. An hour. Do you see that? All the changes all the way up the side of his neck? All the way up the sides of anything. And he's just talking. When I did this, I said, listen, I want you to hold the phone away from your head. Exactly what the manufacturer specs say, do all the above. And guess what? That's the physiological changes with this technology. Next slide. Barb Makota's not here, but Barb Makota is facing listen, she's been doing a 12-year workers' compensation claim because she worked for TELUS. And you know what she did? She sold cell phones. So she had them strapped to her head. They got her to put them on a chain between her breasts, all the above. And guess what doctors are saying at the World Health Organization? They're saying this is causing the most aggressive cancers in the world called glioma, and it usually takes 80% of the people out in a year. And here's something that just breaks my heart. When I get calls from doctors and from mothers saying, my child's 22 years old and he's got brain cancer. I said, tell me where his cell phone was. And they said, under his pillow so he doesn't miss the texts at night. We got to think about this stuff. There's reason they had landlines. I know this technology is wonderful, but guess what I've told people too? They've said, Curtis, this is a nice technology. I said, listen, when I was young, speed used to make you run faster too. You don't do that stuff just to do this. And we've got to think about this because it is causing problems. Here they are, somebody else, Curtis, my son's an IT professional. And they said he's got testicular cancer. Now here's the thing with guys, and this is why I'm pointing at guys most, because listen, we could have an airplane run into this building and guess what guys would do? Cover their groin. No matter what, you're covering your groin and trying not to spill your beer. That's the way it's going to be. And guess what? To have these IT guys, testicular cancer. I said, he's an IT guy. I said, I bet you he's got one cell phone in one pocket and his work cell phone in the other pocket. And even my tech guy came and he goes, Curtis, how do you like my Bluetooth? And I said, well, aren't you just a real dummy? I said, so where's your cell phone? He said, in my pocket. I said, good. I said, now you're radiating your testicles and then from there to your pea brain. I said, you need to smarten the hell up. I said, because you're not using that stuff in my environment. So listen, I'm really archaic, you know. No, I don't have the little dial phone or that kind of stuff. But guess what? I use landlines for all the reasons in the world. And here's Barb. See this above her ear here? And they just said to Barb, hey, Barb, guess what? That phone, here's what, you can imagine this is an electrician. They said to Barb, that phone is only putting out this many watts. And that's not enough watts to burn you. Instead of, guess what? High-speed radiation and sitting in a microwave. Listen, to hell with the watts. It's those high-speed frequencies that are doing that to you. You don't want to do that. Next slide. Here when Barb came to me, and listen, the work we do isn't nice. I don't believe anybody. When Barb came to me and said, I've been radiated by my phone, I said, tell me a story. And while she's trying to tell me a story, I said, what's going on with your hand? So I said, tell me what's going on. Barb goes, Curtis, this is my cell phone hand here. She said, I can feel it in my hand. I can feel it climbing up my arm. She didn't know I could see this going on, even when she said, would you help me? Would you represent any of this? And it's after this where, listen, they radiated the heck out of her. But these guys just said, hey, the watts aren't enough to burn you. Instead, guess what? They burned her on the inside. Next slide. Hey, guys, you know what they did with this? They radiated an egg. Take a look at that little chick. Mutated beaks. Mutation. The deceptive language they use with this is, oh, we only subjected them to 0.9 if this is microwatts or whatever. It was really a low power instead of it's a high-speed frequency where they're talking genetic mutation of ovaries. And when these guys did these tests on the egg to take it back to the simple part of this, think about this when your children are in school. Think about what this is doing in your homes. And I mean this with Hydro and these guys. For us to represent this information as professionals and for the minister to write us a form letter thanking us for our interest is just garbage, when this is the reality of what's going on. Otherwise, I would not represent this. I would not be here. But guess what? This is what it's doing to you. And if I wasn't here, I wouldn't be doing my job. Next. Now, when you talk about this in an electrical application, because you can actually see these frequencies doing this, it's actually an insurable item. Here they've got single conductors coming through the top of a metal cabinet. Now imagine this. This is 60 hertz, 60 cycles a second. Cell phones, 900 million hertz. Wi-Fi, 2.4 billion hertz. Here are these different frequencies. Because these are single conductors coming through here, they didn't put in an insulating board here, so the metal on the cabinet, as the frequencies are doing this, here's what these frequencies do. This is expanding, collapsing, expanding and collapsing. And here's what it's doing 120 times. So the metal on the cabinet, everything's saying, hey, they want us to change direction and change polarity. So they try to change direction and they can't because it's metal. So what does it do? It generates heat around here. This heat will exceed the insulation value on the conductor, and this would have caused catastrophic electrical failure in a lumber mill. This might have killed people. It would have caused fires. But here's a real insurable issue that when we did this work, this is for the mill and their insurers at the same time. Next slide. Now here's the thing with these guys too. And I'm telling you this. If Corex comes to your property, listen, you beat those guys with a stick. I don't care, because I'm going to tell you this. You can imagine this as an electrical professional. Do you know what these guys did with these installers because they want this grid in that quick? These guys aren't electricians. They've got 2 weeks training. 2 weeks training to come in and pull your meter and swap your meter. And guess what? These guys are paid on volume. If we came to your home as electrical professionals and we were going to shut off your electricity to swap a meter, we would come to your door and say, okay, you've got to turn everything in the house off. We're going to turn your power off for a short period of time. We're going to pull your meter. We're going to check all the connections. Then we're going to put in a new meter. but we're going to check them, clean them, tighten them. We're going to have a permit. If the meter base has got problems, we're going to swap it out. Do you know what these guys are doing? They're sneaking onto people's property. They're sneaking onto properties, into buildings, and pulling these meters off without thinking what's going on inside that building, if they've got something turned on, if it's under load of any particular kind. And they're doing this in a minute to hurry and get off the property. And what these dummies don't even understand is you're going to cause electrical problems. You're going to cause electrical problems that are going to fester. That fire might not happen right away. Now, you've heard about these fires associated with these meters? Imagine this dumbass government of ours has said, it's the electrician's fault. It's the existing wiring's fault. Instead of, you've got a guy that shouldn't even be touching that gear. That guy, if he worked with me, listen, you'd be digging a trench. That's what you're qualified to do after 2 weeks. Here's your backhoe. It's called a shovel. Get to work. It's called an apprenticeship. This is what they do. The idea that they're doing this, and the reason I want to show you this is a stab connection. So when they pull those meters off, they've got 4 prongs on them. So one, if it's an older building, you're going to have corrosion. You might have oxidization where your electrician's got to clean that up, check the lugs, check everything. Those stabs can be loose. The idea that these guys yank this thing off and slam a new meter in there without experience, but somehow they've got an electrician back on the road that's supposed to be monitoring this stuff is just garbage. Because here's what it looks like. Here's a stab connection. Here, imagine this. Here's the good stab right here, 49 degrees Celsius. This one is 193. And we're talking about if they turn on their a little more power or do more, you're going to have a failure. You're going to have an explosion. You're going to have a fire. You're going to have arcing. You can't even based on, never mind the frequency aspect of this. Do you guys hear that some 23-month-old twins were killed in a house fire after this? And you know what these guys did? They blamed the homeowner instead of, they didn't even tell insurers. You can't electrically do that. It is just such garbage that they would even attempt to do stuff like that and not be qualified. And you know what they've done? Even in doing that, you've denied electricians the work that they're supposed to be doing. Because even when we build a building, we can build the biggest building that there is for all things. Do you know what hydro does? Their qualified electricians come in and put on those meters. We wire the tops, we'll wire the bottoms, we'll wire everything up. Guess what? They come in and put it on as qualified electricians. You can imagine this. If you went to hydro and said, I've always wanted to work in a substation. I have 2 weeks experience. Can I go work in a substation? I'll tell you what. They're just going to kick your butt off the property immediately because get back in there and dig that trench. That's all you're going to be doing. It's horrible that they're doing this. They're not even working in conjunction with you guys. They're sneaking on your properties where, guess what? You might not have this fire until later on down the road. Somebody's going to turn on something and something's going to fester until this fails. You might be sleeping at the time. Your children might be sleeping at the time. But guess what? It is going to burn your building down. It's going to kill people. And that's another reason why in itself, you got to go to your MLA and you got to talk to people because that is garbage and it shouldn't be done and it's not insurable. And for these guys to blame you guys, your houses are burning down because there's something the matter with you. Yes. Well, this is, depending on this is actually the connection issue itself. But you're right. You're right about that. If you've ever seen that, and I actually should have brought a video, because what he's talking about there. What he's talking about here is when you open up a switch or do anything like this or pull a breaker open, do those things, you should see what's going on when it's under load. I've got a video what somebody sent to me, and when these guys at a substation opened up that switch, I'll tell you what, here's a big lightning bolt above that thing where if you got close to that thing, I'll tell you what, it's just going to rip you into pieces and just hurt you bad. The idea that if one thing is plugged in your building, when these guys pull your meter, you're talking about potential surges. You're talking about electrical problems inside the buildings. People's devices are failing in their homes. And you know what they're being told? Hey, we put in the meter base is fine. It's your fault. It's not insurable. Can't put in a claim. BC Hydro is not going to pay any attention to you. And BC Hydro, guess what? That's a public utility. That's your area here. And that's the worst part again. electricians, journeyman electricians with permits. The scope of the work, that's what needs to be done for any meter to be put in. And guess what? We wouldn't go, listen, if it was that easy where we could just go into a high-rise and say, Curtis, how fast can you swap out these meters and make a lot of money, and who cares if the place burns down? Well, that's different. To realistically pull a meter off, take a look at it, inspect it, do the required work. Maybe you even have to change the meter base. You're talking a half an hour. You're talking an hour. You're talking about doing due diligence with the homeowner and then going back and say, okay, you're powered up and ready to go. Turn things back on. We would never sneak on your property and do this thing and do it live. Never, ever, ever, just because of the liability. If we did that in a government building where we just shut down their power when everybody's working, I'll tell you what, you're not going to be working there anymore. Next one here, because this is a stab connection. Pardon me? Yeah, just if you want to just hold the questions, and we're going to get this. Now then you talk about some of those connections in those meter bases are wired. And here's an example of this. Here's a wired connection that is going to fail and causing problems. And this wired connection is actually so hot that guess what? The electrician couldn't open the switch like this. We literally had to shut it down the live side, pull it off the bus bars, and swap out the whole entire gear. And that's what I'm talking about. That took this guy hours to do that. Not some unqualified installer hitting this thing and yanking on it and doing that kind of stuff. So you want to be careful because this stuff will fester, and when it fails, listen, you guys have seen a lightning bolt hit the ground before? And nobody runs out there with the old kite in the sky and does those things unless you don't like them. So you got to think about that. Next slide. Now that's the end of my presentation. I'm telling you this. I'm reporting to the government right now that guess what? Now you can imagine this, how horrible this is for me. These guys have installed 1 million meters. I'm telling them you have to take out those meters and have them qualified by electrical professionals and done properly, or those homes are at risk. You don't know what those guys did. That's independent of the frequency issues. But I want you guys to pay attention to this because guess what? Our government's just not doing its job. Shocks the heck out of me. You're going to hear stuff from Brian, the same thing in this issue where these guys have got a bigger agenda because guess what? Hooking up a smart grid? Here's a horrible thing. How many people have driven across the highway on the connector and you got those dead spots where you can't use a cell phone? You're going through the mountains and you can't use a cell phone, right? Well, guess what? If we can put up towers everywhere, everybody in the car can be on their cell phone and watching movies, answering their phones and doing all this stuff at the same time. And guess what? They're billing you, making money while they're monitoring you, while they're doing this. So you guys just pay attention to this because it is dangerous. And the last thing I want to do is see people get hurt as a result of that. Hit the target. But for you guys here, you know what? You throw them off your property, you call the police. Because these guys can say that, listen, that's part of the government agenda. That is garbage. The Clean Energy Act does not allow them to come on your property and install illegal gear. They are not allowed to do that. You call the police. You refer this to us. You refer this to other people, and we'll deal with these guys. You do not want this crap on your property. No, you're right. They shouldn't even be on the buildings. Well, here's the thing for me. I'm getting calls from people all over the place, and they're saying, my ears, my eyes, I lost my eyesight, problems, tinnitus, health challenges. People are vibrating, they're angry, they're depressed. Now here's something else that we're going to do too is now, because Brian's ready to go with this and we're going to get going, then we're going to have a question and answer period. So you guys hold those off. But all your questions are important. We're going to answer all of them. Now Brian's going to talk up some stuff here. And like I said, there was a time when I would have said to Brian, come on, governments wouldn't do that. We pay for those guys. Those guys are supposed to be working for us, not the other way around. But Brian's going to show you guys some stuff that's going to shock you with this.
Thank you, Curtis.